careful. Let's move on to the next session. As if we haven't discussed the Palestinian issue so far, what more can we say after these 2 days? Well, we'll try to bring up some things that have not been said so far over the past 2 days. We have a very diverse group here. Let's name them from left to right, or those who are closer to me, those who are less close to me. Dr. Kobi Michael, a scholar in the Institute. He's been researching Palestinian society and the Palestinian topic for many years. He used to be in the security coordination, responsible for the security coordination with the PA in Judea Samaria. Next to him is Dr. Ronit Marzan. She's a society and politics researcher in the Palestinian Society from the Haifa University. She wrote a very interesting book. I recommend that you read it. We don't sell it outside here. Yasser Arafat, a rhetoric of a single leader, and we even served for a while. At the same time, Dan Shapiro, former ambassador, a senior researcher in our institute today. You know, he needs no introductions here. He's well known as a person with a lot of know-how and experience with the American administration. Another friend, Major General in Reserves, Gershon Hacohen, who had various positions in the military, the commander of the colleges. And I'm not going to list, the entire list here. He's he's a thinking individual who has some very original thoughts, and today he's a senior fellow at the Begin Sadat Institute. So let's begin. These past few days we've been talking about the Trump plan. Is it good for the Jews? Is it bad for the Jews? Should we rush to annex or not? Is time working to our advantage or to our disadvantage? And we just saw it in this recent poll. I can't see what's on the slides now, but we should be seeing the first slide of the presentation. And I'd like to kind of fast forward a bit. I don't want it to sound like what people said yesterday, that we have to advance. It's not campaigning. So not this slide that I am seeing now. Let's go back to the previous one. What's going to happen in 5 years? Let me understand. What's going to happen with the Palestinian issue 5 years from today? How do you each see the Palestinian arena and the relations between us and the Palestinians, and what's happening inside, what's going to happen inside the Palestinian society? How will things look like in 5 years from today? Try and transcend a bit from our mundane day-to-day preoccupations. Okay, Kobi, you go first. Thank you. I think that even if we look 5 years ahead, we have to always remember the point of departure, which is, in my view, one of the greatest low points of the Palestinians, if not the greatest, because of a convergence of several explanations that are also related to the profound fragmentation within the Palestinian arena, society, and politics, but also the place of the Palestinian issue in the region, in the international arena, and of course in the context that's been discussed in recent days, the deal of the century, etc. I think that if we are going to continue, or if these trends will continue and there won't be any serious change, we might find a pretty shattered and splintered Palestinian arena here, not just between Hamas and Fatah, not just between Judea and Samaria and Gaza, but even within Fatah, within Judea and Samaria, within the Palestinian national mainstream, because of the fact that it's not that clear to anyone what the day after Abbas will look like. And, sectarianism, that partisanship that's being developed within the national bloc, within Fatah, is such that could lead to a kind of a disintegration of the framework of the PA. Even each of these competing blocks within the PA, it is within their interest to maintain the framework of the PA, but perhaps the Palestinian society will not be able to rally sufficient strength in order to deal with this partisanship, and we might find ourselves in a situation that the Palestinian society, in such a reality that there's so much strife between the different groups, the different parties, and because of the ongoing distrust of the Palestinian people towards their leaders, we might find ourselves in a situation that the Palestinian society will be in some kind of a withdrawal process. It's going to go downhill, and this and perhaps out of this crisis a significant change might grow, some kind of reshaping of this region that would be beneficial both for the Palestinians, both for Israel, and for the region. And perhaps if the forces won't be able to do or won't want to do what needs to be done, we'll find this Palestinian situation as something that's pulling this entire region downwards and has a detrimental impact on Israel as well. So you said that these processes have nothing to do with whatever Israel will do today, tomorrow, or next year. Of course, they're always related, but Israel is not the main reason. The reason is a structural, inherent reason of the Palestinian society, which cannot rally the ability to reach national agreements, not even in times of struggle, even as we're speaking here when they are facing such a crisis as the Trump outline, with this cold shoulder that, they are being treated with from the Arab world. We see that the relationship between Abu Mazen and Hania is just, kind of lip service. It's not genuine and heartfelt. They're not really trying to join forces and contend with this challenge. This is something that's inherent to the Palestinian society. It's some kind of an internal fragmentation within Palestinian society that we and maybe others as well, we contribute to that. But that's not the main contribution. It's not the main reason. Thank you, Ronit. As somebody who for a long time now you've been researching and following up on the younger generation within the Palestinian society, the younger generation that at a certain point will take the leadership. Where do they want to, what's their trajectory? Where are they going? I'm not going to put the Palestinians on the sofa of the analysts, but in history there's an entire part that's called emotional history. I'm so pleased with myself because I finally managed to operate the timer. Now you can look at it. I have a minute left. You took from me, I'll take some more time. And they are feeling this emotional turmoil, a significant emotional turmoil, because when we look at the Palestinian national narrative, it has gone through several incarnations. Today, the younger generation understand that the armed struggle and, getting rid or eliminating Israel is passé, obsolete, no longer relevant. They also understand something else, that the two-state solution and the Abu Mazen's political struggle, that's also obsolete and irrelevant. And today, we see more and more the younger generation, and there was this current within the younger generation that was more marginal in the political system is now gaining more momentum and gaining more attention within the Palestinian society. And that's a very interesting view that includes young Islamists, young Marxists from the left side of the political map. And according to this mindset, they're saying to the Palestinian leaders, they are telling them, you have failed in the armed struggle, you have failed in the diplomatic struggle, and now we need to choose a non-violent cultural struggle, a struggle over human rights, a struggle for one state. And the implications are very clear for the people of Israel. One state, its meaning, its significance is that when the day comes, then that day is not far away. The Jewish nature of the country and the democratic nature might be put to a very difficult test, because if there is annexation and if we have an expansion of the state of Israel for it to include the Palestinian population as well, then we will have to answer the question, are they going to become citizens who vote to the Knesset, or are they going to become, Class B citizens, and we will adopt actually an apartheid policy? And what we see in the social media networks as a response to the announcement of the deal of the century, we see this being discussed. They understand that the world only understands a discourse of human rights. The general public opinion thinks it's much more attractive, much more legitimate, and they are calling their leaders, which they consider to be corrupt, leaders who have forgotten the children of the Palestinian nation and family, and all they care about, they only focus on and care about their own children who study abroad, who work abroad, who live abroad. And I think that when I look 5 years into the future, it's a serious challenge for Israel as well, but just as much to the Palestinian society. If it doesn't, come realize what the situations is, it doesn't choose new leaders who place the national interest above their own private personal interest, we'll see a splintered, shattered society. We will see more violence, more despair, and this lack of hope. And the state of Israel will have to deal with all that. Thank you, Ronit. You even gave me 39 seconds back. Well done. Dan, let's think about two situations. One situation is that Trump remains for an additional 4 years. Another alternative is that the Democrats retake the White House. What will the U.S. do in these two situations with respect to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? Well, I doubt that there's even a chance to actually implement this program as it was presented. What might happen is that without the participation of the Palestinians, for various reasons that we had already heard, you're talking about the Trump alternative. Yes, they cannot, agree to it, to participate in it, to support it. So with the support and encouragement of President Trump this coming year, and also in his second term of office, Israel will operate unilaterally. Maybe there's a slight delay because they don't want the annexation legislation to progress before the elections, but that's the general direction, that Israel will operate unilaterally with the support of the Trump administration. But there's also another scenario, and in this scenario, let's say in the next 4 year, in less than 1 year, and then for 4 years we will have a Democratic administration. I don't know if we'd already presented Cuomo's statements. He's one of the leading Democratic candidates. Everybody objected or at least criticized harshly the plan. They said that it's not within the framework of a two-state solution. And I think that such an administration, of course, it depends generally on who the specific president will be. Well, I think that there are several implications from the way this program was presented. One is that this program is in contrast to the principles that the U.S. and Israel have agreed upon in the long run, after there were so many efforts to advance solution to the conflicts. First of all, you cannot impose an agreement by external entities, but this is what's happening now. The Trump administration wrote the program, perhaps after consulting with Israel, but that's only one side. And now they're presenting it, and it's not a proposal, it's an ultimatum, and that is in contrast to the principle that we agreed on in the past. We also agreed in the past on the principle that agreements can only be an outcome of direct negotiations between two sides, and that is not, and this is not an outcome of direct negotiations. And we also agreed in the past on the principle that the two sides cannot advance unilateral measures during negotiations, because that shuffles the cards, and it is detrimental to the environment and the option for an agreement. So I can imagine a scenario in the future in which a Democratic administration with the support of the progressive majority that comes up in all the demographic data that we see from the U.S. that here the request of the Palestinian population to focus only on human rights. They will come perhaps with an international coalition. They'll come up with some kind of a proposal, and maybe to try and impose this without direct negotiations between both sides. The lesson from this measure perhaps is that all these principles that we agreed on in the past, they have been rejected, and perhaps an external element, the US under a democratic regime or an international coalition, will come with a proposal and agreement and will say to both sides, this is the new ultimatum. Thank you very much. I appreciate the fact that Dan speaks Hebrew here. Look, he speaks so beautifully.
Gershon, you're somebody that I know likes to sometimes also fantasize a bit, okay? So, at a low altitude, like a drone, okay? But let's look from a low altitude at what's going to happen in the next 5 years. Let me be optimistic. A lot of the potential between the sea and the Jordan River never gets up off the ground because the borders that were determined in 49, and then the restrictions of the division, the Clinton plan, the other clans, all of that have created an inability to develop this area. So let's say if somebody from Hebron is going to Ramallah today, it'll take this person, there's almost no barriers, there's no military barriers, but it'll still take 2 hours because of the road itself. The problem is the desert and whatever is west of the water line. Anything from Arad to the Gilboa. If you go to Gilboa, you take the road down south. You go to Ramallah, you get to Amman. It's the same road. So the changes in the environment have changed the point of gravity in this country, and have also stopped us from traffic with other countries. The state of Israel is a bridge between Mesopotamia and Egypt. We are in this tiny point, and we stopped the bridge. If a truck wants to get from Damascus to Egypt, they can't anymore. So creating new infrastructure, new capabilities that would be in the benefit of both societies, and with Palestinian business people who understand that this monolithic idea of the two-state solution is not in their benefit. And a lot of Palestinians know that they are reliant on Israel today. But this can create a tapestry of coexistence that can also bring about new ideas. And flourishing will happen in a way that is beneficial to all. How will this happen? I believe that things occur not only through plans and official programs, but like a lot of things in the day-to-day of all of our lives, things develop over time. And there's also going to be new ideas. And in this regard, when I look at the Palestinians and how the Palestinians, what did Ronit say about the young people? I talk to a lot of young Palestinians, and I talk to older Palestinians as well. And there's a very important component that needs to be addressed, and that's religion. And it's not only just the radicalism of the Hamas, but it is part of life, and it's also very relevant to a lot of Israelis. That there is a common denominator in this regard. And they know, not as monolithic entities, that people know how to live with Islamic views and the limitations of life in Israel. And the Palestinians live in both worlds. They live in the world of religion and the world of Israel. I spoke to two Palestinians. They sit next to me. They were a couple of days ago. They're from the Hebron, construction workers, and I asked them, "Are you Hamas?" And they looked a bit Hamas to me. And so in any case, one of the guys said, "Not me, but he is." And the other guy said, "Me? Why me? Why am I Hamas? I am from the it's not the I am from the Shekel party, because they believe that Netanyahu, meaning they voted for the Israeli Knesset. No, forget that in the moment. We'll talk about that later. But my point is that the Israeli nation, in a moment of distress, invented a lot of things. We also invented along the way how a state should look. But now we're struggling with 21st century problems, and we're dealing with them with 19th century and 18th century terminology. We're in the 21st century. We need new terminology. Okay, so if I'm taking what we heard yesterday, that we're in a time of change, of growth, all that, we can't even imagine what's going to happen 10 years, 15 years later. By the way, notice, none of you people, when I asked you what's going to happen in a decade, didn't talk about two-state solution. But in the poll that we saw from Tzipi, she showed us that still 55 to 60% of the Israeli public believe in the two-state solution and 70% believe in separation. Okay, and none of you, the panelists, even talked or fantasized about a two-state solution, because we know that it's not going to happen in 5 years. Okay. So we enjoy the military coordination between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. The PA, which you described as falling apart and all that, but we still enjoy coordination with them. What's going to happen in the next few years with that? Look, generally, and I don't think I'm reinventing the wheel here, the security coordination is an interest for the Palestinians as much as it is for Israel, perhaps even more for them. Because what Israel can do without the Palestinians, they cannot do without Israel. So one has to understand that the PA they're threatened. The authority has domestic threats that are obviously not being played according to democratic rules of game. The domestic threats of the Palestinian Authority are more in keeping with what we see in the rest of the Middle East, and we can see how they manifest. It was even mentioned this morning, for example, in June 2007, the Hamas took over the Gaza Strip. Okay, so the PA, generally speaking, has a very high interest, a very clear interest in maintaining their military coordination with Israel. It doesn't mean that it will be maintained in the same format as it is currently, because we may be in circumstances where the PA is not strong enough to deal with the fauda situation, the unrest, the fermentation within its population, and they may be forced that, despite the fact that it's within their best interest to continue cooperation, they may be forced to stop. Okay, wait a second. I'm sorry that breaking the rules that I set for myself. But if I look to reality now, let's say that Israel decides to start a unilateral annexation or some parts of the plan that was proposed. Will that not bring order to the ranks among the Palestinians? Won't they coalesce into... I don't know if that's even possible. We have to be pretty cautious, okay? I don't see, even with a very big external threat to the Palestinians, not us, anything, I really can't see them forming ranks. Look, one has to understand, it's not just the Palestinian issue. What's happening in the Palestinian side, it's a reflection of what we see generally. Meaning there is a gap between an ideological, theological gap, a deep gap between the Hamas and the authentic Islam and the Fatah, which are nationalistic. They have common denominators, but generally speaking, they have very great schisms and disagreements, and bridging the gaps between them in the Palestinian side is pretty difficult. So I think that if Israel is unrestrained, as you called it, maybe does a unilateral annexation in such a way that it's not only poking the eye of the Palestinians, but also, I don't know, sticking them in the gut, then we will simply have accelerated processes that are already potentially there among the Palestinians, and certainly that would put an end to our military coordination with the PA. But one has to understand that the coordination is in their best interest. It is. And this scarecrow that they raise, even when Abu Mazen, just recently, Abu Mazen called on the Palestinians to come out to the streets, they really didn't listen very much. And Abu Mazen talked about the fact that we have to continue the coordination with the Israeli armed forces. Okay, I haven't heard from you. I'm sorry. Oh, yes, the buzzer buzzed. Okay, we're moving on to... I understand. So we had a kind of dream, didn't we? I'm going to Gaza now. Talking about Gaza, we had this... dream or fantasy that conditions would occur where the PA would go back to controlling Gaza and maybe would be able to do business with the PA. Do you see any such situation? well, there's a really serious problem. There are such deep rifts within Palestinian society, as Kobi already talked about, between Fatah and Hamas and others. But there's one man in the Gaza Strip, Ichas Anwar. And Ichas Anwar, since he was appointed head of the political he's been doing quite a lot in order to go for unification and national reconciliation with the Fatah, so that this reconciliation would release him from the stranglehold that he's under of the Islamic Jihad. Meaning, Ichas Sinwar would be much more comfortable to go to the Fatah, then will continue to be lashed to the sides with all of the limitations and restrictions of the Islamic Jihad, which are also fighting for him for activists and funding. But Ichas Inwar is dealing with problems that are, of a scale that is unlogical. On the one hand, Israel that wants to significantly reduce the blockade. Wait, just this morning, Israel began, nobody heard about this and nobody saw this, but Israel opened the barriers and put in strawberries. It was covered, right? Yes, but Ichas has to go to the Gaza people with really significant problems. They had to go in a significant way because these people have significant problems. They're paying enormous money for gas, for electricity. They don't have gas because the Egyptians are retaliating against them because one of the Palestinians went to the Suleimani. It didn't go to electricity. They don't have water. We know what the situation is, horrible. So when Yichas Anwar needs to convince the Gaza people that, here, this state political fight is better than an armed fight, then he has to show some kind of accomplishment, serious accomplishments vis-a-vis Egypt, vis-a-vis Israel, and vis-a-vis the Palestinian Authority that is sanctioning the Gaza Strip in certain ways. So up until the Palestinians understand, the two leaderships of the two Palestinian sides, those in Ramallah and those in Gaza, that this is the moment, a testing moment. This is where their mettle will be tested, really. Do they have a vision, a national vision of a Palestinian independent state? And they have to do this reconciliation among their own people and to coordinate their own strategy. It's not going to happen. Nothing's going to happen until they do this reconciliation. If they don't understand the fact that they are in a moment of history, that their national vision is standing at their doorstep waiting to be realized. But there's something that we have to do on the Israeli side, and the Americans as well, by the way, that we have to give the tools, the accomplishments necessary to Yichas Anwar on the one hand, so he can be able to face his people and urge diplomacy versus war, and on the other hand, not give a hand to manage or negotiations only with Hamas, and in some way basically continue to weaken the Palestinian Authority. That would be wrong of us, stupid, insane of us, in fact. Dan, I turn to you. One of the important roles of the U.S. over the years, and this was talked about yesterday in the War Games, by the way, that the U.S. as a restraining force, the U.S. as this responsible adult that knows how to stop the nonsense of the other countries. Is there any situation by which the U.S. can go back to this role to be accepted by the Palestinians, as this role? And I'm not talking about just a democracy. I'm talking about now the Republicans and the following future. Okay. What we've seen in the last 5 years has been a clear preference of the Americans, on both parties, by the way, Democrats and Republicans, to be less present in the Middle East, at least militarily. It's not as if the Americans have all packed up and left. There are still tens of thousands of troops on the ground, and and in the Gulf, and there's all the military aid from the U.S. to Israel, of course. But the heavy price of the Iraq War was such. The Iraq War, we began it by mistake, by wrong intel, using wrong intel. And we paid a very high price in blood for that wrong intel. And this has convinced the big majority of people in the U.S. among Democrats and Republicans alike that Americans shouldn't be in the Middle East, or to as little as possible. This was a decision by President Obama not to attack in Syria in 2013 after use of chemical warfare, and President Obama talked about turning to Asia, and now we've seen it with Trump when Trump talks about America first, and let's bring home the troops from Syria, even though that there's a policy, an American policy that states that you should have left the troops there. In any case, that's the trend in America, in the U.S. I don't see big changes very soon. But I want to go back to your initial remark, because you said we didn't talk about a two-state solution. I think the view of a two-state solution is still a strategic vision, even if it's unrealistic at the moment. Anybody can agree that that there's no Palestinian leader at the moment that can make the decisions required, and make the concessions required, and maybe this is true of the Israelis as well. But the view that the two-state solution is still viable, I believe it's an asset to Israel and in Israel's relations with the U.S., at least in a time where there's a democratic administration in the U.S. Now, I talked a little bit about the progressive, the increasing progressive generation in the U.S. and another generation that most of Americans will be minorities, Latin Americans, Asian Americans, women, LGBT, whatever. They'll be part of a minority group. It's already true of all under 18-year-olds in the U.S. right now. So the young generation, the rising young generation, are going to be closer to democratic values. And in the last elections, Democrats won the popular vote. They lost twice in the electoral vote, but they did win the popular vote. So that's a trend. You can see that, and you can attribute to that to the situation that the U.S. has seen in the last few decades. So with this rising generation, it would be hard to talk to them without at least maintaining the two-state solution as an option. If you let it go, I think it would be mistakes and be harmful to the U.S.-Israel relations. Okay. Gershon, I may be misquoting you because people talked and everybody understands what they understand. So this is what I understood. Okay? And there was and we had a remark yesterday dividing two people in Israeli society. Those that know exactly the end game, they know what's going to happen or think they do, but are fearful of paying the price necessary to accomplish what needs to be accomplished, and others like you who don't know what the end game is, and they believe that they'll do everything they can in order to get the vision along the way. So as someone who doesn't know where we're going, why not annex now? Why not? Okay. A new reality has been established that is pushing us towards annexation. Until this reality was established, I was among those who would prefer not to annex, because I look, for example, at the option of Abkhazia in Georgia after 2008. Putin managed to arrange it in an optimal fashion. I mean, in terms of international law, he didn't annex anything because he returned to the original border lines. And now Abkhazia is part of Russia, and all of those other areas in Georgia are part of Russia. So preferring the de facto over the de jure means that because that option becomes less and less relevant to what's happening in actual reality, meaning on the ground. And what happened to us now is that in some sense we were told you can't continue to try to fulfill your potential in this game. And when I look at this and I think, then why annex? Because it brings a new energy into the system. I want new energy. It may be bad energy, negative energy. That's possibly true, but the idea of injecting the system with new energy is not necessarily an idea of preferring war. And by the way, that's why we struggle to understand the Iranians that are doing this active war without wanting war. The same of Ichisanwar, by the way, in Gaza, in many respects. It's a very hard reality for a Westerner to grasp. It's not a Western idea, but it's gaining in momentum, even if we struggle to understand it. And what it means is the state of Israel, let's say that it annexes these territories in the Jordan Valley. Let's say by this, Israel creates or establishes a reality. Did you only mention deliberately the Jordan Valley and not annexation of Judea? No, no. I personally, by the way, I mean, if I look at the Golan Heights, for example, in Judea and Samaria, where are developing Jewish settlements, Judea and Samaria, not in the Golan Heights, and by the way, not in the Jordan Valley either. No, because the planning law of the Tel Aviv district area in Tel Aviv, this is bureaucratically, it gets to the very end of the periphery. I want to live in the periphery. I want to live in the end of the periphery. Meaning if, so, okay, wait. So, no, because if you build another, did you hear what I said? No, the frontier has a very important role, even in American history, by the way. But I believe that's not the point. That there's no. Let me put it this way: the contention between the Labor Party in Israel, the Avodah, and the Camp David discussion, Menachem David and Sadat, which was not only ended by Yigal Allon, but was also ended by Rabin and Peres. I mean, Menachem Begin didn't want this agreement. Yigal Allon said it like this: Menachem Begin, who was a Polish guy, a European guy, he wants a contract. We want it open, meaning the Mapai party at the time didn't want things closed definitively, because, and we looked at the book of Judges, every new era must be opened again. Every new era begins anew. So cosmologically speaking, my worldview is there's no end state. There is no, the reality of struggle is a world entire that requires us day to day to keep momentum, and that's what I want. I want momentum. Okay. There was a slide that we wanted to show. I'm not sure if it was how the conversation developed. Wait a second. Another one. Let me see the slide. What do we see? What do we see in this slide? No. Can't you see a slide? Oh, great. Okay, thank you. Okay, let's look at the slide that we created in the Institute. What are the implications of a two-state solution for the two people and the character or nature of the state of Israel? 28% say that it will harm the state of Israel's character as a Jewish state. I think I have it here as well. 18% say that two-state solution will be bad for the democratic nature of Israel. We talked about these issues yesterday. 8% say that there will be a need to redefine the character of Israel. Maybe that's what Gershon's saying, I don't know. And 46% say nothing will change, everything will remain the same. And that's the best solution we have. Okay, so we have 7.5 minutes. And I would like to ask you the following question. Let's say that the voice saying, this is an opportunity to reshape reality, to, I'll say it in our shallow talk here, a new strategic formulative factor that will be the reference point for all future events. So this is an opportunity for Israel to annex the Jordan Valley and to implement Israeli law over the Jewish settlements. What will this do? What will happen next if we do this? The annexation can be done in more than one way. I don't see a contradiction between annexation and implementation of Israeli sovereignty on Judea and Samaria, and between an actual agreement. I don't see that it's intrinsically problematic, because in any previous outline that was on the table being offered in the discussion between Israel and Palestinians, whether it's through the Americans via Clinton or the other outlines, there was an agreement between Israelis, Americans and Palestinians that the Jewish settlement blocks will be part of sovereign Israel, and the Palestinians in recompense will get some of the territories. The question was, what would be the ratio? I remind you that Bibi Netanyahu, as PM, and Kerry conceded sovereignty of the Jordan Valley. I understand, but I'm talking about, is there a basic discrepancy? No, he said 30% of the. No, the annexation, as I said, can be done in all sorts of scopes and manners and ways. If you do it in a way that's, again, not trying to do everything in order to harm the Palestinian interest, if you do it gradually, maybe in a way in which you really do preserve a horizon in which a state process with the Palestinians is still possible. While you understand and can be magnanimous in your victory and allow the Palestinians their own territorial wins, so that they're supposed to be theirs anyway, even according to the Trump plan, some of these territories are supposed to be Palestinian. So we can soften the blow and we can do it successfully, even if it's gonna very rile the Palestinians a great deal. But if we do it in an aggressive way, in a cold, coarse way, in a way that we're without maintaining any possibility for diplomacy later on, then of course that raises the option of friction and conflict. So I turn to you now, Doctor. Does this not lead to what you mentioned earlier? Kobi talked about this earlier, about a system that is about to collapse. Will this annexation, if it happens, I mean, it will probably just accelerate the collapse on the other side. I wrote today in the Haaretz article an op-ed that I called it the annexation of emotion. That was my op-ed article this morning, and it really talked about that when you annex land, not in agreement, not in consent, unilaterally, you also annex emotions of rage, hate, revenge, and they'll make their accounts with us. They'll close accounts with us. They'll do that. They'll retaliate. Maybe the calmest city in which suddenly we'll hear terrorist attackers coming out of that city. So non-consensual annexation in a way that's not part in an overall process that really deals with all of the core issues, that usually ends with humiliation. And we know what happens with humiliation on a state level and on a regional level. Humiliation never ends well. That's a fact. Okay. Second, I think the Palestinian people and the Israeli people, both, in my opinion, must understand that the Palestinians are not only part of the problem, the Palestinians are also part of the solution. And the time has come for the Palestinians to understand that the Israelis are not only part of the problem, but they're also part of the solution. And these populations, these two populations and these two leaderships of Palestinians and Israelis have to understand that healing must require an empathic environment. And empathy means an emotional environment in one side looks at the other side and puts themselves in their shoes and tries to grasp their aspirations, their dreams. And that's what am I doing in my day-to-day. I go on social media and the internet sites of Palestinians, or We Beyond the Fence. These are very important websites that send their message out to the world. But if we really analyze what's happening on websites such as these of Palestinians, and I showed you a picture here, I'm not entirely sure that you managed to see it. Can you see it? Anybody, if you want, can come to me later and I'll show you. In any case, the images like this that show you, this is a face-up app that turns the map of the state of Israel into a map of Palestine, then you're just encouraging the Palestinians, and you bring them to a point where they're going to want this, because when IDF soldiers tell them in the processions, go home enough, the Palestinians are saying, we're trying to go home. We're trying to go to our home, they're saying. So what we have here is something that we have to understand, that if we give the Palestinians hope, they won't want to come here. That's I don't think that's going to happen in 20 years. Explain, done. I don't understand what's happening here. The Prime Minister of Israel stands next to the American president and explained to us that on Sunday he's going to make a decision, and after a couple of hours it needs to be discussed and analyzed. It's postponed in a temporary fashion because the administration is trying to recruit support among Arab states. That's very hard to recruit support among the Arab states, specifically for unilateral annexation, specifically from the Jordanians. But in any case, maybe it will be postponed till after the elections. Maybe there will be the establishment of a committee, a joint committee, and so the result of unilateral annexation would be that that a lot of Americans will come to the conclusion that there won't be a two-state solution. Meaning that's an old story, it's over. And they look for options, for alternatives. And one alternative that is related to the American values of democracy and human rights is what Ronit suggests. And she said it clearly. Why not give citizenship and voting rights to any person, anyone who lives between the Jordan and the sea, the Jordan River and the sea? And then we'll see what happens. Democracy is a deeply rooted value in American culture. And when people are asked if you needed to choose between Jewish Israel and democratic Israel, a vast majority, Republicans included, say, no, democracy is more important than Judaism. Democracy should be the guiding principle. Okay, Gershon, because we're democratic, then the last sentence we give to you, sir. Human rights can be realized through a one-man, one-vote procedure, but in essence, it's a lot more than that. And we must find something new here that really is a lot more than this procedural one-man, one-vote. To find, I look at us as well, we Israelis. Yes, I would prefer 20 dunam of an olive orchard rather than the right to vote. It depends on what you need. I don't know. It depends on what you need. But when I look at Palestinians, Israeli Palestinians and others, and they have a deep connection to the earth. And the Jews, I want to be in Tel Aviv, right? So I would prefer, human rights are not something that have one universal criteria. Human rights is something that you can realize in different ways. And if you want to give people a point in which they can live with dignity and choice, then a lot of new and great things can be done here. Because the bottom line is, the people of Israel must learn to live in this arena. There's no way in which a Jewish child doesn't know or speak Arabic. We need to connect to this land, to this earth. And I believe that it would lead to a lot of good things here that would completely change the desire for separation. Thank you very much. It was interesting. We try to really look far ahead to the future, because usually we try to think, just 1 or 2 steps ahead. But here we try to look miles into the horizon and see where it leads, and see how we can really understand where all of the decisions we make today influence how or where we arrive tomorrow.